Scott Agness covers the Indiana Pacers for The Athletic in Indiana and in Indianapolis, and he's kind enough to join us right now. Hey, Scott, how are you?
Hey, doing well. Enjoying the craziness that comes with free agency, right?
Well, and you guys had a little bit of that with Indianapolis yesterday. With them, with the Pacers ended up signing Malcolm Brogdon. That was a big. I mean, that was a big contract. I know they're gambling a bit that they'll get the same Brogdon we saw in Milwaukee last year, but I think that was a move they probably had to make, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when Utah kept pushing Bojan's price a little higher. He's already 30. I think that's something they weren't quite comfortable with. Paying him into their 30s. And so we saw a huge age shift for this Pacers group, who now the old hat is Victor Oladipo at 27.
When's Vic due back?
No timeline specifically put on him, and it's a strange injury. I don't know how much your audience would be following this. It's a quad injury, right? And it's not even similar to what DeMarcus Cousins suffered. Much more worse. Usually this type of injury happens not in athletes and usually in people 40 and older. So he's well ahead of schedule, but they purposely have not put a timeline on his return. Best case scenario is probably in mid-December right now.
All right, let's talk a little bit about Bojan Bogdanovich. The Jazz had a real need for upgrading the perimeter and being able to find snipers. They're a terrific defensive team, Scott, as you know, but they kind of ran into a wall against the Rockets. You can only guard so much. At some point, you're going to have to make shots. They didn't make many in the playoffs. I know they've liked Bogdanovich, and clearly he was a guy that stepped his game up, too, after Oladipo's injury last year. As a guy that's covered him, tell Jazz fans what they're getting in Bojan Bogdanovich.
Yeah, he's an outstanding guy, good guy in the locker room. A little bit quiet, you guys will find out in the media circles, right? Not really. He doesn't thrive necessarily in those situations, not to say he's bad, but he's really valued in that locker room amongst the players. Can be quiet unless you get him get going with his teammates. But on the court, he's going to be a guy that can really knock down the three-point ball. I think he'll really benefit from the playmaking ability from Indy native Mike Conley Jr., as well as, of course, Donovan Mitchell. He'll be right there. Joe Ingles right there that can spot up. And then I think really one big area that Bojan's really adapted and improved upon his game is getting creative without the ball. Oftentimes he'd slant and dive backdoor. He'd slip past the defense, get in spots maybe they weren't expecting, especially against switch everything teams, as it seems more and more teams are moving to. And then also I would say you got to give him a credit for the way he's improved upon his defense. Pacers are very much stick with your man-to-man, very little switching, even in pick and rolls. And he's done a nice job over these last 2 years. He was often the guy that would guard LeBron, that would occasionally get some time on Giannis. And so that's an area he's solid, not great, but very feasible and much better than all of us, including the Pacers coaching staff, was expecting when he signed here 2 years ago.
Well, that's key. The defensive part that you've hit is key because, you know, that's the mindset and the philosophy Quinn Snyder and the Jazz have kind of hung their hat on here. It always helps, and I know having Miles Turner behind him as a good shot blocker and rim protector helps. Well, he's got the best rim protector in the world now in Rudy Gobert. What kind of would you list him as an adequate, as an average, a slightly above average? I haven't heard anybody call him an elite defender, but above average defender?
Yeah, I would put him slightly above average. And you know what's very interesting, as you mentioned it, having Gobert back there, he's used to having that last line of defense, that safety net, because Miles Turner, who led the league in blocks, had been doing that for him the last 2 years. So that should aid, I would say, in the transition for him on the defensive end.
Fill in for our listeners. I mentioned, I think, and I'll include myself in this, most people wrote the Pacers off last year after Oladipo's injury, and they just kept working, Scott, and competing and really opened a lot of people's eyes, pushed it into the playoffs as well. And I think, and I read this weekend, it might have been something you wrote, but it was a lot on Bogdanovich and stepping his game up because he was having a good season with Oladipo, but it really looked like not only defensively but especially on the offensive end, he stepped up his usage and his efficiency numbers and his production when Oladipo went out.
Yeah, you're exactly right. As I put it, he really had to shoulder the load. And one of the issues the Pacers had last year, really the last couple of years, is that they don't have the scores, the playmakers, and really even lack three-point shooting. They were one of the better three-point shooting teams efficiency-wise, but just didn't attempt a ton of them. And so I think that's also now with better players and more of a playmaking core around him would open up Bojan even more offensively. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, his numbers shot up, and he's seeing that pay dividends now, I think, in his contract. He's a tough guy. He never really wants to miss practice. He hates sitting out. I think he sat out one practice all of last year. The coaching staff was really urging him to sit out more because he's almost playing all year round when you include his contributions leading his Croatian national team. But what's interesting here, Bill, is they did not qualify for the World Cup this year. And so this is his quietest summer he's had, he says, since 16, because he turned pro then. He started traveling on his own by himself, and now this is his first full summer, where he can really rest and relax, and I think that will be beneficial to him now when he's on the other side of 30.
Scott Agness with us from the Athletic Indy here on the Bill Riley Show, giving us a little scattered report on Bojan Bogdanovich. Well, that's good because it sounds like Donovan Mitchell's going to have a busy summer if he ends up making Team USA and competing in the World Cup. It also sounds to me like you just gave some music to Jazz fans. It sounds like he's got a little Jazz DNA, likes to come to work, doesn't like necessarily tons of attention, and won't miss a lot of time. Jazz fans love hearing that stuff. Yeah,
no question. He's a guy that's tough, but he doesn't tell you he's tough. He just is, right? And he's not going to brag about it. He was a guy, along with Thad Young here in Indy, that just did their role, never questioned anything, just went about their business with a workman-like mentality, blue collar, as they like to say here in Indianapolis. And I think Jazz fans will appreciate that, certainly.